All right, so now what I want to do is I'm going to sort of kind of apply my final touch in terms of how I want the value of the skin overall. And so we can get rid of, well, actually, I use a black and white layer, but let's just do this for sake of how I sort of work. I'm going to apply these adjustment layers to the image, and I'm going to work with really levels. I'm going to work with, a lot of times I take a black and white layer. I'll show you that in a minute. I do a hue saturation adjustment layer, and sometimes I'll apply a photo filter depending on the scene and how I want to use this in the final. And so adjustment layers allow me to apply a setting, like say levels, and it's only destructive once. So if I was to take and do Command L and apply levels, I would be doing that and I'm stuck with it. And so if I wanted to say, oh, I went too far, and then bring it back, I'm destroying pixels twice. So it's really important to understand how adjustment layers work. So we go down to the bottom of the palette here, and I say, let's go to start with levels. I'm going to make a hue saturation. I'm going to make a black and white, and let's make a photo filter just for kicks here, because I think that'd be good to show. So let's turn off that, the black and white. Let's go to levels first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look, I usually make the image smaller so I can kind of get a sense of the overall feel of it. And I'm going to now, let's say I'm going to take my blacks and bring them down just a little bit. That kind of makes her eyes, the eyelashes pop a little bit. The shadows under here look pretty good. And then highlights, you can see on my histogram, I've pretty much gone all the way to the edge here. So I don't want to affect my highlights too much. I could maybe a little bit, but I think in this case I'm going to leave it alone. Now in the mid-tones, I can bring it around to what looks good for me. So let's say, let's just go a little bit on the lighter side. That's going to smooth out her skin a little bit. If I go to my black and white layer here, and I set my opacity to soft light, it also kind of desaturates my image a little bit, but I'm just going to use it really lightly, so maybe at 20, say 20% opacity. That kind of pops the blacks a little bit more. If I apply the black and white and I say, look, I like it, but it's a little too much, I may go back to my levels, and then I can change that too. So I'm not locked into my settings on any of these adjustment layers. If I go to hue saturation, on every image I do, I always desaturate the master setting about -10 to 15. This is my way of sort of color balancing because I'm colorblind. And I do this because in the steps that I've done in terms of putting this together, it always seems like, for me, that the skin seems to get a little bit of a yellow, reddish warmth effect, especially in the shadows, and that bothers me, so I'm taking out a little bit of saturation there. I go to the reds here, take out about 10%, yellows about 10%. I do that on every single one of my images. It's just sort of my way of working. Again, it may not fit your vision as an artist, and that's okay, but I'm just showing you how I do mine. Photo filter. If I'm going to drop this in a background, or if the light modifiers I used were a little bit too warm, I might take my photo filter here and go to, and I usually use the warming, the 85 filter, or the cooling, say the 82 or the LBB, one of those two, and I might just give it like a 2%, 3% cooling to take out a little bit of the warmth. And that might be too much again. We might go 2%. And if I drop it in the background and it's a really warm background, I may go the other way. So that's how I sort of set my fine-tuning adjustments there. And the last thing I'll probably do here is if I look at her, I see a couple hairs that are kind of flying away, and maybe one side of her jaw looks like it's a little bit too far out. So not to be overlooked, I am going to go to the liquefy. It's one of the greatest tools Photoshop has. And I'll give you just a quick session how I do that. So you can see that we have a lot of options here. Don't be over sort of whelmed by that. The most important thing is you have the push tool up here. I guess they call it the forward warp tool. And what I do is, if you're working in an area where you only want one section to be affected, you go over here to the mask. It's the fourth from the bottom, and I can paint along areas that I say do not affect. Okay, so let's just do this, and I do this all the time now. And so I come in here, back to the warp tool, set my settings here, and I'm going to push, let's go over here, that jaw in just a little bit. Now the problem with liquefy is that you can overdo it and you lose the integrity of the person. So the first thing I would do is look at, am I really changing the structure of this person's face? And that's not really, just a little bump there. And sometimes I'll push the ears in a little bit because I want them kind of to look equal. And of course the hair. So let's move the hair around, little squigglies there, just to kind of fit the look that I want. And maybe his shoulders pop it a little bit. A lot of times what I'll do, even if the person's nose, obviously her nose is perfect, but the lighting that I use sometimes gives me a little too much punch on the highlights there. So what I do is I will push the highlights in a little bit with a liquefy. And you can fix the eyebrows and lips and all that, but we're not going to do that. She looks great. So we say okay. So you can see before, after, just kind of cleaned her up just a little bit. And let's do this. Here is what I call a pretty clean final image. So let's move on to our high key look with Andrea, and I'll show you how you do that.